In June 1940, as France capitulated to Hitler, his primary ally, Benito Mussolini, decided to waste no time in joining the struggle to redivide Europe. On June 10th, the Deuce declared war on Britain and France, with British-controlled Egypt as his main objective. Having proclaimed the second birth of the great Roman Empire in 1936, Mussolini believed Italians could not only hold their colonies, but dominate the North African coast. In Italian Libya, he held two massive armies totaling 250,000 men. However, they were a paper tiger, poorly equipped, wielding outdated World War I artillery and barely 100 light tanks. Imagine that. 250,000 men, but with weapons from a previous era. Could they really stand against the British Empire? Despite a 6-1 numerical advantage, the September invasion of Egypt stalled after just 90 kilometers. Near the Nile Valley, the Duce's army ran out of water, and their transport trucks were abruptly seized by high command and diverted to the front in Albania. For 3 months, the Italian forces sat paralyzed, a delay that allowed the British to build a devastating counteroffensive. On December 9th, 1940, the British struck, clearing the Italians from Egypt in 3 days. Over the next 2 months, they advanced 800 kilometers in occupied eastern Libya, taking 130,000 prisoners. With a total catastrophe looming, Berlin intervened, forming the German Afrika Korps in February 1941. Hitler appointed Lieutenant General Erwin Rommel to lead this mission, a commander who had recently distinguished himself leading the 7th Panzer Division during the fall of France. Rommel arrived in Libya with strict orders: fortify the defense, avoid major battles, and conserve strength. But the headstrong general had no intention of following orders. He immediately wrote to Berlin, stating his primary objective was to conquer the eastern Libyan region of Cyrenaica, followed by northern Egypt and the Suez Canal. Would you have followed orders? Or like Rommel, would you have gambled everything on an immediate attack? On April 1st, 1941, the Afrika Korps lunged eastward. The British, caught in total confusion, began a chaotic retreat across the entire front. Italian Libya was reclaimed within weeks, and several major cities and weapon depots fell into German hands. To celebrate, Rommel took a pair of captured British tank goggles and began wearing them atop his uniform cap as his personal insignia. While Italian commanders pleaded with him to stop, Rommel accelerated. He ordered his units to cross the impassable desert to outflank British strongpoints, giving his officers only 1 day for refueling. By May 1941, the Afrika Korps reached the vital port of Tobruk. However, the grueling desert transit had exhausted the machines, and Rommel's repeated bloody assaults were repelled by a desperate British garrison. Forced to shift to a siege, Rommel waited. In mid-June 1941, the British launched Operation Battle Axe to break through the German lines. The offensive failed due to the technical unreliability of the new British Crusader tanks and the stubborn German resistance. Rommel destroyed 90 British tanks in the engagement, demonstrating mastery in using terrain and coordinating tanks with lethal 88mm anti-tank guns. His victories impressed both Berlin and London, where the press coined the nickname the Desert Fox. Blinded by success, Rommel prepared for a decisive dash to Cairo. But on June 22nd, 1941, everything changed. Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa against the Soviet Union. Could the Afrika Korps survive as a secondary theater while the world's largest invasion was happening in the east? Reserves and supplies for the Afrika Korps dried up almost overnight. While Rommel was starved of resources, the British reinforced. They formed the 8th Army, boosting their strength to 700 tanks. On November 18, 1941, they launched Operation Crusader with a 2-to-1 superiority in armor and air power. Rommel miscalculated. While he was conducting a risky raid into the British rear, the 8th Army managed to relieve Tobruk and link up with the garrison. With his forces split and the front broken, Rommel was forced into a massive retreat back to the Gazala Line. By January 1942, the British had occupied all of Cyrenaica, pushing the front 800 kilometers away from the Suez Canal. It appeared Rommel was defeated. But in the desert, is a retreat ever truly final? While the British struggled with overstretched supply lines through the non-functional port of Benghazi, fresh German panzers and ammunition finally reached Tripoli. On January 21st, 1942, Rommel sent 3 heavy armored columns toward Agadarabia for tactical reconnaissance. Encountering minimal resistance, the mission turned into a full-scale offensive. By January 28th, Benghazi was captured. By February 1st, the British evacuated Derna. The 8th Army fell back to the Gazala Line, a 60-mile defensive front stretching from the coast to the remote Bir Hakeim fort. Both sides spent months preparing for a final showdown. The British began re-equipping with American-built Grant tanks. These were a game-changer. Their 75mm guns could finally match the German Panzer IV and outrange the Panzer III. Rommel responded with Operation Theseus. On May 26, 1942, he unleashed a massive artillery barrage in the north, using trucks with aircraft engines to kick up dust clouds and simulate a massive tank concentration. While the British watched the north, Rommel's real armored fist rolled south around the Bir Hakeim fortress at 9 o'clock at night. The plan immediately faltered. The 1st Free French Brigade under General Koenig fought fanatically at Bir Hakeim, bogging the Italians down, while the 7th British Armored Division engaged the German thrust. The American Grant tanks dominated the first encounters, shredding a third of the German armor by sunset. Rommel was trapped, overextended, and out of fuel. At this moment, Rommel's career was on the line. Would you have retreated to save your army or pushed forward into the trap? He pressed on, saved only by the intervention of the Luftwaffe and a desperate supply convoy that managed to break through. The Gazala Line slowly crumbled under the pressure of German 88mm guns and Stuka dive bombers. After 16 days of brutal siege, the French were forced to evacuate Bir Hakeim on the night of June 10th. By June 11th, 1942, the entire line was in Rommel's hands. He moved with incredible maneuverability, concentrating his forces, while the British artillery remained scattered and their armor acted without infantry support. On June 12th, the Germans crushed British forces near a strong point known as Knight's Bridge. The next day, 3 British tank brigades tried to counterattack, but were shattered. By the end of June 13th, Knight's Bridge was surrounded. General Neil Ritchie ordered a full retreat to El Alamein, the last defensive line before Cairo. Rommel pursued relentlessly. By June 18th, Tobruk was blocked. On June 20th, German engineers breached the anti-tank ditches and the Luftwaffe suppressed the defenses. After an Indian brigade was overrun, German tanks seized the airfield and port. On June 21st, despite having massive stores of equipment and fuel, the 33,000-man garrison surrendered. Germany erupted in celebration. And on June 22nd, Hitler promoted Rommel to field marshal, the youngest in the Wehrmacht. The Axis had advanced 600 kilometers and reached El Alamein, the final barrier before the Nile Delta. Was this the work of a military genius betrayed by his own nation's logistics, or a gambler who simply pushed his luck too far? What is your verdict, and where in the world are you watching from? Tell us how you see the legend of the Desert Fox in the comments below.